Bien, estamos listos para llegar al cierre de la actividad con este último foro de Caricaco Summit. Le doy la bienvenida a Amadeo Quiros, quien es founder de Caricaco Ventures y quien va a liderar este panel. Así que démosle el fuerte aplauso a Amadeo para recibirlo. Ahí está.
Hello again. So we're getting to the end of the Caricaco Summit once again. Thank you everyone for being here. Such a great event, and this is because of all of you guys. So again, thanks a lot. Today I have the opportunity to have a fire chat with a person that all of you guys would love to have known 10 years ago. I bet you're gonna know why when you get to know him. So please give a big applause to Daniel Vogel, co-founder and CEO of Bitso.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite and happy to be here. There's a few people that know me from 10 years ago and I think they regret not paying a little bit more attention, but
Let's start with that. Like, he's a crypto guy, okay? And nowadays we'll talk about crypto and we'll want to invest in it. But more than 10 years ago, this like crazy guy was trying to convince all his friends, family to buy Bitcoin. And he told me that none of them followed the advice and they regret it right now. What happened? Like, why were you so sure about crypto?
so some of them did, but I guess the story is, so I'm originally from Mexico. I was born in Mexico City. I then went and I was living in San Francisco. I went to undergrad to Stanford and I studied economics and computer science. And then I was working at a startup and I was completely obsessed with this startup. I was fully obsessed with it. We were doing real-time bidding and using machine learning, which is kind of like a precursor to AI, to try and figure out people's preferences and show them ads. And I was completely just obsessed with this. And then one night, a Venezuelan friend of mine, we were having rum, and he told me, "Have you heard about this thing called Bitcoin?" No. So I went back home, and I wasn't drunk, but I had a few drinks, and I Googled Bitcoin. And the first thing that came out was this description that said, so it said, Bitcoin is an economic experiment to build a decentralized peer-to-peer currency that operates outside of the realm of central banks. And I read that sentence and I said, what the hell is this? What does it mean? What's a decentralized currency? What does it mean for something to be operating outside of the realm of central banks or governments? And I couldn't understand. And I basically just started clicking links on the internet. And the next thing I knew, the sun was coming out. And I'd spent the entire night reading about this thing. And the obsession at work became basically an obsession with Bitcoin. And so I quit my job. I went to HBS where I met a few friends that are here. And I basically spent those 2 years trying to figure out what the hell would I build on the Bitcoin space. The first time that evening where we were drinking rum was at the end of 2010. And it still took me a while to basically quit my job. But the story is, you know, I saw Bitcoin basically go from fear to like less than $1 to $50. Así? Así? Okay, sorry about that. So we saw Bitcoin basically go from less than $1 to $50. And all of my coworkers who at that point called me the Bitcoin guy would tell me, dude, this is a Ponzi scheme. Get the hell out of it. I had trouble like talking to my siblings about this. And then when I went to HBS, I talked to professors, students, administrators, and it was really hard to like convey why I thought this was interesting. I think the ultimate reason why I thought Bitcoin was interesting were basically three things. Number one is the digital era was here. Like there were no more digital deniers. We were using WhatsApp to communicate with each other. We were distributing, you know, school content online. Like the digital world was here to stay, was not going anywhere, but there was no native internet money. There was nothing that was built for the digital era. The second thing that I thought was interesting was, you know, when you think about, for example, email, like your email server at your company or at someone else's company, can be built under very different infrastructure, but you have a common protocol that allows our email servers to communicate with each other. And there was nothing native in money that allowed you to do that. And Bitcoin kind of like was starting to do that. And then the third thing was this open source nature. Like if you wanted to innovate on financial services, you couldn't do that. You had to go and work at PayPal or work at a bank or work at the Fed or at the central bank in Mexico or whatever. And now you basically have this opportunity to build something in a completely open source manner. And I just thought those three things were going to be very, very important. So I've been a fanatic of Bitcoin and of crypto and of blockchain, for the last, I guess, 15 years or almost 15 years. And it's been a wild ride. Lots of ups and downs and a lot of volatility, but a lot of fun.
Well, sounds like a hell of a ride that you've had. So how do you go from being like this Bitcoin guy that your friends like kind of told you, that's your nickname, to being co-founder of Bitso? Like, how did it all happen? How did you guys come up with the idea, and how did you say like this is my thing?
Yeah, so I was at HBS and I was trying to do stuff with Bitcoin, and before Bitso, I actually tried to build a company to move money from the US to Mexico using Bitcoin, and we're just doing a bunch of experiments. We built some Bitcoin games, we built some Bitcoin mines. Well, we were just doing a bunch of stuff, and when I say we, it was just whoever would listen. So I had a bunch of projects with a bunch of people through the years, and at some point, a guy who was at school with me said, "Hey, I just came back. Well, we all went for holidays to our respective homes, and this guy's like, hey, I just had Christmas dinner, and my cousin was talking about this thing called Bitcoin, and he was obsessed with it, and you're the only other person in the world that I know that is obsessed with this, and this guy is also Mexican, and so you guys should chat." And so that was Pablo, and Pablo had a friend whose name is Ben, and they were excited about starting a Bitcoin exchange in Mexico. And so I talked to Pablo, and at the beginning I was like, would love to figure out if I can be an investor, would love to figure if I can help. And so we were just trying to figure out a way to work together. And so we kind of like struck a little bit of an advisory deal where I would just be an advisor for them. I was still in the US, I was still doing my MBA. These guys were about to start the company. And they one of the first things they needed was money. And so they needed to raise capital. And you can imagine trying to raise capital for a Bitcoin exchange in Mexico in 2014 or wasn't the easiest thing. And so I was trying to help them. And they eventually got a term sheet. And they got a term sheet for a $1.2 million valuation for $300K. And they were very excited because these guys were also very obsessed about building a Bitcoin exchange. And so when I saw the terms that they had gotten, I told them, "Hey, why are you taking these folks' money?" And he's like, "Well, because they're the only people who would give us money." So I told them, "Why don't I give you the money?" And that basically led to a number of other conversations, and then I ended up co-founding the company with these two guys. But we had met very little. Like the only thing that we really had in common was that the three of us were obsessed with Bitcoin, and we wanted to bring Bitcoin to Mexico and then LatAm. And yeah, that's a little bit of the origin story, I guess.
That's nice. So you started like being the angel of their first round, and then getting in the team. And how did you decide? You were getting in HBS. That gives you so many opportunities to do a lot of other things. Like, when were you sure that this was the thing? I understand you were obsessed with it, but weren't you curious of like exploring? That's a little bit about what you do in university.
Yeah, so I mean, I was there, and my advisors, my teachers, everyone told me like, "You're crazy. Like, don't start a company. Like, go in and work at Amazon, go out and work at Facebook, at Google. You're a technical guy with an MBA. You're gonna be able to get any job you want, and you can learn that, and then you can start a company in the future." And I think maybe many of you have seen this video of Jeff Bezos. He talks about like what made him quit his job and start Amazon, and he talks about this thing called the regret minimization theory or framework. And basically what he says is like, there's moments in time where if you don't take the shot, you'll forever regret it. you'll have this regret, and you'll always be kicking yourself in the butt because you didn't take that chance. And it was actually like, once I heard him like phrase that regret minimization framework, it was very easy. I was like, look, I had made some money like with Bitcoin. And so I was lucky enough to like not be in debt. That MBA was one of the most expensive things I've done in my life because the price of Bitcoin has really appreciated, but whatever. But I wasn't in debt. And I was, as you said, like really obsessed with this idea. I thought this industry was something I was going to grow. And I really said to myself, like, dude, if I go and I work at Facebook or at Amazon or at Google, like, I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot and it's going to be fun. And I get the chance to stay in the US, which was appealing. But I think I'm going to forever regret not taking the chance of like starting my own thing. And it wasn't easy, right? Like, you know, when I told my mom said to me like, hey, I Googled this thing called Bitcoin, and like, you know, it just talks about a bunch of criminals and stuff. There was this thing called the Silk Road, which is a place where people laundered money, not laundered money, sold drugs and arms and all sorts of weird stuff online. And that had just gone bust. Like the DOJ had just basically taken over and seized this thing called the Silk Road. And that was the first thing that popped up when my mom, you know, Googled Bitcoin. And so my mom was like, are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into? So there's a lot of like skepticism from people that, you know, genuinely wanted the best thing for me. It's hard when your parents, when your siblings, even your friends, when they show that level of skepticism, like it's not easy because starting a business is already hard. I think I was lucky enough that on the financial side, like I was able to take risk, but it was still not easy. Like it was still like, shit, yeah, what am I getting myself into? And then there were like, in that time, there were still like some really interesting early Bitcoin enthusiasts that actually ended up in house arrest or in jail because this thing was so new that there were no real clear rules. And then the, you know, regulators were saying where you were operating a money servicing business illegally. And so, you know, you need to pay for that. And the reality is that a lot of these folks, like, they weren't trying to actively break the law. There was just no law. And so that was one of the things that was always very hard. And it was important when I struck my deal with Ben and Pablo, like one of the things that I talked to them about is like, look, one of the things that's a non-negotiable is we need to operate this company in a way that none of us ever ends up in jail. And
you can lose money, but not your freedom,
not liberty,
right?
Like, yeah, not your freedom. And so there were a lot of scary things about doing this. But at the end, I think the enthusiasm and, you know, the high level of conviction and just the opportunity to have a lot of fun. Because like starting companies can be a bitch and it can be really hard. And like there are times where it's like, oh, fuck. Like we were just talking about this on the way here. Like, yeah, there's obviously very hard moments, but there's also amazing moments. Like there's so much fun to be had by starting a company. And the prospect of doing that was very appealing to me. Throughout my life, I had started a bunch of little projects, but I had never really like started a real company. And so that was very, very appealing.
And Daniel, let's talk about those moments that you say, like, it's a roller coaster. Were those two moments, like you had this like highlight that you say, like, this was the moment that I said, like, good that I challenged myself, that I went all in. And when was that moment that you said, what am I doing here?
Yeah. So the funny thing about the crypto industry is that you get those moments a lot. You get them like all the time, you know, both ends of the spectrum. Like, you know, the crypto industry goes from like, we're going to save humanity, cure cancer, and take us interstellar to like, you know, this is a scam, it's a fraud, and everyone's going to jail. And you know, there's very little in between. And so there's been a lot of that. I'll say like, you know, in the early days, you know, launching the platform and then just seeing customers was incredible. And then like, you know, we used to organize a bunch of like meetups at the very beginning because one of the things that we thought was very important was like building trust because, you know, people were going to give us their money and trust us their money and who the hell are these folks? And so we wanted to have a very active kind of like trust building, you know, set of activities. And so we organized a lot of meetups and met a lot of our customers. And the early indications of your customer is really coming to you and saying, "Hey, I saw this feature that you built and it's awesome." And then you go and you go in your CRM and you look at the profile and you're like, "Wow, this guy's like transacting 10 times more than he was before I built this thing." Like those little moments of really finding that product market fit are super fun, and I love those. And every time that we felt like we cracked something was very, very rewarding, because there was also late nights and, there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into building these companies, but so it was a lot of fun. And then there's been a lot of times when it's been very hard. Like the story that was particularly difficult for us is it's 24th of December. I am literally in my living room wrapping gifts for Christmas. And it's about 1 p.m. in the afternoon. A little bit later, must have been like 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, maybe 2 p.m. And the lawyer of the company calls me and says, we have a problem. What? Well, the Central Bank of Mexico was our only market at that time, and basically our only source of revenue. The Central Bank of Mexico just published a law where we need to shut down the service to clients in 30 days. And I was like, wait, what? So he's like, yeah, just check your WhatsApp. I just sent this publication to you. So I'm reading this, and it basically like 95% of our volume, we make money through volume, and 95% of our volume came through the payment system in Mexico, which is called SPAY. And the central bank was shutting down all crypto players from transacting via SPAY. That meant death for us. And so I called a very close advisor, and I'm like freaking out. He gave me, I think, one of the best advices I've ever gotten. He said, like, look, it's 24th of December. There's nothing you're going to be able to do today. No one on your team is going to be able to do anything today. Tell everyone in the company to chill out, enjoy Christmas and whatever, and let's meet on Monday. Once everyone's done with the holiday celebrations. And I think people at the company really appreciated that. And I think I appreciated that, having a few days. But we thought the company was dead. And we actually had to sue the central bank, and we had to do all sorts of crazy stuff. And that was also in hindsight, it was also very liberating, right? Like once you know that the alternative is death, the alternative is not
there's nothing else to lose, right?
Yeah, the alternative is not hey, you're gonna lose 20%. Or you're gonna lose 40% of your customers. It was like the business is dead, and then you just start doing all sorts of crazy stuff, right? We found our ways into the halls of senators and congressmen, and we had all sorts of very weird meetings where it was obvious that at that time the Central Bank of Mexico was fighting for its independence, because we just had a new president who just come into power. And so he was threatening the independence of the central bank, or at least that was a narrative. So there was a lot of political stuff that was happening countrywide. And even though we were a very small company, we were able to kind of get us inserted into that battle in some weird fashion. And it was amazing, right? I remember being we had 7 days to go. Company's dead in 7 days, or at least, we have to shut this down in 7 days. And we're with this really powerful congressman in Mexico. And the guy had no understanding whatsoever of what this was about. No. He's like, what? Okay, I don't care. But don't worry. Let me call the central bank. And he gets on the phone with the central bank and just basically in front of us has a negotiation. It's that thing that we're talking about and blah, 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 blah. Oh, and by the way, and I have the Bitso folks here that they said they're going to shut them down, and I don't want you to do that. And it was just a weird political favor. And I think it was a combination of a lot of luck and having tried really hard. But yeah, then the central bank really backed off, and then we went into a year and a half long fight and whatever, and we figured it out, and then we became the first regulated entity in Mexico as a result of the fintech law and the story with the central bank. We're on much better terms today, but it was very tough. It was definitely very tough. So it was definitely a low light.
Well, that's a crazy story. Yeah, I think what I take of it is you need fighters like yourself to kind of open the doors to a lot of other people. And also you need luck, but luck doesn't come just because you stay watching TV. You guys were doing everything that was possible in your hands. Let's go
Yeah, I mean, just a small thing, because I think there's a bunch of entrepreneurs here, and I'm a small investor in some of them, and the resilience has like two edges, right? Resilience has an edge of the story I just told. It has also a sort of like a more dark side, which is you don't know when to give up. But I still think that resilience is one of the most underrated traits that an entrepreneur needs to have. And I was just talking to a gentleman here, Tommaso, who runs a company called Moons, and man, the thing that they've had to go through, it's also been crazy. And the resilience of that team is really inspiring. And I think you're right. Like, companies really need that grit, because it's never just smooth sailing. And if it is, then you haven't seen the bad days.
Sure. And going to those challenges, take us to what has been, the funding rounds. I heard you have like 6-7 rounds that you've had. How did they change the company? How did you manage each of them? Like, what could you take of the first one and the last one that you did that put you in a unicorn status?
Yeah, so we've had 4 rounds of raises. We did a Series A that was divided into 2 tranches, and those were like 2 years apart. And then we had a Series B and a Series C. One of the like great things about our business is that the margins are very high, and so it's easy to operate. Like, it was easy for us at the beginning to like operate the company at a break even. Basically to break even early, and then if you follow the crypto industry, these cycles, like at the end of 2017, at the beginning of 18, like you become extremely profitable as an organization, no? And so those things are like, but then they go away. And so it's kind of weird because the baseline really goes up, but it's very elusive because, our operations sometimes grow by 20x in 2-3 months, and they come back and you're still like 5x from where you were before. So the whatever is higher, but it's a little bit like an artificial round, right? Because you're kind of like there building out the company, and then you get these moments of euphoria in the market, and then you basically are able to capture a bunch of revenue from that, which then you can basically use to continue to grow. But it's been a lot of fun. Like, it's the fundraising side has been also very interesting and a lot of fun, because it has changed the company, and sometimes in good ways and sometimes in not so good ways. I would say, like, when we started Bitso, for many years, the company was run very leanly. And so that constrained growth. But it also created a very interesting culture of, just a lot of, I don't know even what to call it, like, ¿cómo dices? Como gente que es medio coda?
I'm not very good at English, so
Yeah.
I don't know the exact word, but people that don't want to
Spend a lot of money. Yeah. Stingy maybe is a good word. I don't know. And that has good things, right? Because you really kind of like, it's easier to build an owner mentality when people are very conscious about the money, and having employees that really feel like owners is really important. Once we did the larger rounds, you get some amazing things. Like, you get the ability to like grow and explore and expand and try a bunch of stuff. And those have been incredible for the company as well. They've been very, very important. But it's harder to continue to be stingy. Like, it's harder to tell, like, I still love flying in, economy class, and I don't freaking care. I came here from Miami in economy class, and it's the company's money. Actually, I don't know if you guys paid for this or we paid for it, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like there are some things that, like,
we didn't fly you first class. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I wouldn't even have known. I wouldn't even have known, because I always fly economy for the company. Sometimes I get lucky enough to get, like, the bump because of the miles or whatever, but like, people who join the company, like, I love riding the bikes in Mexico City, so I ride the ecobicis around. And so sometimes people join the company and they're like, why the fuck are you riding the bicycle? And I don't know, it's just like, I like that. And I like people seeing that. But sometimes these rounds make it very hard, right? Because you get executives and they want to fly first class because they've been working at companies where they fly first class. And how do you reel that back? How do you attract top talent that is used to like maybe spending and behaving in different ways, but bring them back to your culture? And then you have someone who's like, man, you just raised $250 million. Why the fuck am I flying on economy class? It's like, yeah, because that's who we are, no? And so it has some difficulty parts. And then also it has had some other difficulties in that, like, when you raise a lot of money, you get a lot of appetite to do a lot of stuff. And it turns out that very quickly money doesn't become, well, except for in some business models, I guess it is, but in our business model, like, money has not been the limiting factor. How do you build the structures? How do you keep a team motivated in such a volatile environment? How do you keep up with a very fast-moving industry? How do you actually create a machine that is able to innovate and continue to innovate? Those things become a lot more important than money, and money definitely helps. I'm not trying to say it doesn't, but it's not everything. There's all these other things that you also need to figure out. And becoming a unicorn for us was also a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed us to close a bunch of deals. We also have a very large B2B business where we do a lot of remittances and cross-border transactions, and we deal with companies there, and companies love dealing with a company that has a very healthy war chest, and a company that is a unicorn and the news, et cetera, et cetera. But the dark side of it is that, like, some people feel like, okay, we've made it. Now we're a unicorn. And you need to like instill a very different mindset on those folks, or sadly change them, no? Because getting to a unicorn was really, really exciting, and we're like incredibly proud of having gotten there. But what we really ultimately care is like the impact of the products that we're building and the people that we're serving. And in that sense, there's an infinity to do, and we think the industry is just going to continue to grow, and there's more opportunities. And now we're really excited about like stable coins as new infrastructure for completely revamping the financial system. So like the opportunity just keeps getting larger and more interesting and more complex. And the valuation of the company is definitely like an accomplishment, but ultimately it's kind of meaningless if you are unable to continue to grow, unable to continue to innovate, unable to continue to deliver satisfaction to your customers. And the double-edged sword of that is that we just had complacency in some areas of the company started to kick in. And so then we need to figure out that, okay, how the hell do we like revamp this? How do we ignite that fire again? How do we get these people that we always talked about, like Bitso being this company full of like this kind of like trailblazers and people who are adventure and maybe like non-conformists and people who wanted to challenge the status quo. And then we started to look at pockets of the company and we're like, holy smokes, like these people are just, they're losing all that risk appetite. And when you lose that DNA, then that's another recipe for death, not dictated by the central bank, but dictated by your own culture. And so you definitely need to work on those pieces.
And it has happened to a lot of companies, that went to unicorns and now don't exist. Let's go through all the exit strategy. We were talking some time ago, and I was telling you, hey, you've done everything now, and you told me, no, I'm missing an IPO. And then I told you, do you want an IPO? And you said, But on the other side, you have funds that have invested in you 10 years ago, and they need to return the capital to the LPs. How do you manage that? Is that something that you want to go through, or what's the deal?
So I think I was telling to you that like part of my personal story has been like this person that has gone around and tried to convince people that this is a real thing and that there's a real technology and that this is an important innovation that we should be paying attention. And so, being able to take the company public would be just such an incredible accomplishment from the storytelling perspective. Not I don't mean for the Bitso storytelling perspective, from my own personal journey perspective in terms of like being able to go from this kid who was at a small company in San Francisco and was known as a Bitcoin guy to like, you know, we built a company in the space and we were able to take it public, and now we can tell that story. We can tell the Bitcoin story, the stablecoin story. We can tell that story to more people. Sorry, and that has a super like personal component that I would love to at some point get there. The hesitation comes from, and I think, you know, one of the panels that just took place, like, you know, they were talking about like sort of the challenges with liquidity, challenges with public companies. But like, you know, I've talked to a lot of friends who run public companies, and you know, things also change when companies go public, and culture also changes, and you have other sorts of issues. You know, we've seen the local story where suddenly, you know, there was this short seller story, and like we saw what that happened, like the amount of distraction that was for that company. You know, I talked to friends who are like, man, one of the hardest things is that, like, you know, people see our stock price, and our stock price moves like crazy because, you know, Trump said something on the news, and we didn't work less. Our customers didn't shut us down. Like, we didn't lose any accounts. We're growing, but now there's a guy that said something on TV, and suddenly my stock is down 20%. And the amount of distraction for our folks is incredible. And he's like, you know, keep your company private as long as you can, or keep it private forever. And so, like, it's kind of like this dissonance between wanting to continue the journey and continue to be, and, you know, continue to educate and continue to bring crypto forward. And then, like, you know, can you really do this and not be full of distractions and have to deal with these other things? And then, as you mentioned, you know, I think today we're in a very lucky spot that our funds today, at least, are not pressuring me yet with wanting liquidity. One of the things that we have done, and I think there's a very early Bitso investor here somewhere, I'm not sure where, but you know, one of the things that we were able to do is provide liquidity to a bunch of the early investors. We've done that throughout the history of Bitso. We have consistently organized secondary transactions where either existing investors increase their equity holdings in Bitso, or if we have a new investor that we really want to get into the company, that we help them basically buy out some of the earlier investors. When we've done primary rounds, we've also had secondary components there. But we basically have, you know, we try to basically drum up liquidity on an ongoing basis. And we have had funds that, you know, were very early on in the history of Bitso and have been selling their positions throughout time. And then we have funds who invested recently and who are very excited about the company going forward. And I'm sure that at some point I'm going to be, you know, if we don't continue to drum up this liquidity and provide these exits for some of the funds that, you know, are getting to their lifetime, like, we're going to have to figure something out. We get approached for M&A fairly frequently. Like, that's another very personal story. You know, sometimes when like a player comes and courts you and says, you know, there's an opportunity for you to sell the company, and times we admire the acquirer, right? Like, these are companies that we admire for whatever reason. We follow them, and sometimes you sit down and dream and say, like, this is interesting. If I join with these guys, we can build something maybe faster, larger. But then at the same time, you lose your ability to be your, you know, to be your own pilot, to be your own navigator, to basically be the person responsible for the path forward. And that's also super interesting. And as I said, like, something that is a lot of fun. And so far we've always opted for continue to remain independent and continue to do our own thing. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but you know, it's also been 10 years. We have employees who've been at the company for a long time. So, like, you can start. We also do liquidity for employees. Or at least for their stock option plans. We give every single one of our employees stock option plans. Every single employee at Bitso that has ever worked at Bitso has had a sorry about that, has had a stock option plan. And I think that's been really fun. Like, we've seen a lot of folks who've taken that and started their own companies and whatnot. But But at some point, like, we need to think a lot harder about what is the strategy going forward. Either how do you create a mechanism to really remain private forever? How do you actually go in and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do an IPO? IPOs for crypto companies are difficult because you don't only have to time the IPO market, you need to also time the crypto market. And I think Coinbase did it really, really well. But like, you know, we're starting to see other crypto companies that are trying to do this, like Kraken and Circle, BitGo. They're struggling because the crypto window opens, but the IPO market is not open. And then the crypto window closes when the IPO market opens, and they've struggled for the last 2-3 years. And so it's interesting, no? And so, but I would love to get the company ready. I would love to take the company public at some point. It's just, I think there's a bunch of other things to focus at the time being. And given we don't have the pressure from the investors, I think we're in a good place.
Definitely in a good place. It's going to be very interesting to have you here in 5 years and see what happened.
I'll be crying or I'll be giving a talk. I don't know.
I think you're going to be celebrating. I don't know which way, but let's go just back a little bit about, you know, something that entrepreneurs struggle a lot is with expansion. You know, you start in your home country, but then you need to go to other countries and it's very different. I think you had an interesting experience in Brazil. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so expansion has been super interesting because I think if you have a big enough market in your home country, you should go really hard in your home country or whatever your local country is. And you know, Mexico is a very big market, but we started to get the appetite to basically try to expand Bitso to other jurisdictions. And so we expanded first to Argentina, and it was super fun. Like we expanded into Argentina and very, very quickly grew the business in a very significant manner. And so, you know, we got a lot of confidence, but it was hard because going from like a single country company to like a multiple country company is hard. Like you need to have all these other dimensions, right? Like not only, you no longer have like, you know, just your functions. Now you have your functions, but you have your geography slices, right? You have like the legal team in Brazil or in Argentina and the product team that's looking at Argentina, but also the one who's doing global stuff and then the ones who are focused on Mexico. So it definitely adds a lot of complexity. One of the things that I have noticed is like, you know, there are a bunch of companies and entrepreneurs that are born in smaller markets. And so they know from day one that they want to go into multiple markets, and they've kind of like built the company almost from the ground up thinking this is going to be a multi-jurisdictional company. That wasn't the case for Bitso, and so we definitely struggled making it multi-jurisdictional. And then Brazil was like this super interesting moment for us because Brazil, I mean, there's a few Brazilians here, but I have found it to be a very different place to do business than in the rest of LatAm. I have found it to be more complex from like almost in every angle, like labor law, tax law, how do you operate, how do you communicate to clients, what's important for your clients. You know, the perception of being a Mexican company in Brazil was a lot more difficult than I had anticipated. No disrespect to the Brazilians here, but I found like, you know, just as I was having conversations with people from Brazil, like I felt like, you know, people just look down to Mexican companies a little bit. And maybe that's not the experience of everyone. It's definitely a little bit of our experience. And when I've talked to other Mexican companies that have tried to expand there, kind of like a similar thing. And then the other thing that was super fascinating for us is that the crypto market in Brazil just completely changed between us deciding that we wanted to go into Brazil and actually us landing in Brazil. The market really opened up, competitors really opened up. You know, regulatory-wise, the country kind of like gave enough clarity to like open competition. And now you're like in this super interesting dynamic where, you know, the fintech companies like Nubank are offering crypto. My bank in Itaú in Brazil offers, you know, you can buy and sell Bitcoin. And so the market kind of like really opened up. And whereas in Mexico, our strongest revenue opportunity is on the retail side, and our B2B side is something that's growing, but is still smaller than our retail business. In Brazil, it just ended up being the other way around. Like the way in which we ended up finding product market fit was just purely on all the cross-border stuff. And we still operate a retail business there, but it's significantly smaller. Like what's growing for us in Brazil is all the B2B cross-border stuff with stable coins, et cetera, et cetera. So it was also kind of like interesting that the recipe of what works in one country sometimes work really well in other country, like it happened to us in Argentina, where our retail business is our larger business. But sometimes it doesn't work, like in Brazil, where whatever dynamics, competition, market, whatever, regulatory, required us to kind of like iterate on that. And I moved myself to Brazil. I lived in Brazil for 2.5 years. Our youngest son was born there, and I had a lovely time there. And I still go back to Brazil often. I'm going there in a couple of weeks. It's a fascinating market. And then after that, we expanded into Colombia. And Colombia has also been significantly easier for us as an organization than it was Brazil. There's a little meme that we send in the company. Whenever someone says, like, in Brazil, you can't do this, or it's because in Brazil, there's this little, sticker that people send where it says, it's like a video game. And it says, like, choose your level. And it says, like, easy, normal, hard, Brazil. So, yeah.
A good story. Part of the challenges. And I'm going to change a little bit. I know you're an angel investor as well. I understand that when you were in HBS, something that was very interesting is that your classmates did like this angel fund where some of them invested in Bitso. I think some of them are here. Like, how important was that, and how important do you think it's for you to invest now in startups that are trying to follow you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think are really fun, like the people that you meet, particularly when you're young and you meet them just out of pure chance, like there's no interest involved. It's just like, you happen to go to the same school or whatever, whether it was elementary school, high school, college, master's. It's like, there's always like a very special bond with those folks, because these are just folks that like you meet in a very different way. And I have always found that the people that you meet under those circumstances, for whatever reason, have always ended up like being very special to me. And at the end of the 2-year program, the 2-year MBA program, a group of us did a trip. And while we were in that trip, we came up with the idea of like, how do we stay connected? How do we create like some mechanism to have an excuse to continue to see each other? And so someone came up with the idea of like, why don't we start a fund? And then, we can have our GP meeting every year. And then when we get married and have kids, there's some like legitimate economic reason to like go in and meet with your friends from school. And so we started this little fund, and actually that fund was an early investor in Bitso, and we've had a lot of fun, investing in a number of companies, and it has been a great excuse to stay together. We still get together every year. We get together and talk about stupid things, and then we talk about the portfolio and the things that are going well and the things that are not going well, and that's been a lot of fun. And then aside from that fund, like I've invested in a number of other funds, sometimes as an LP only, or sometimes as a GP and an LP, and that's been a lot of fun too. Like the ability to kind of like be able to just spend a little bit of time with entrepreneurs and maybe share a little bit of your story and have them reach out to you for advice, and just have them kind of like save just save some time, because I think we lost a lot of time at Bitso building a lot of stuff. Some of that was like the ecosystem was very early, and so like when one of the very common structures to invest in LatAm is the Cayman sandwich. But it didn't exist when we started the company. No one had done a Cayman sandwich before, and now it's like a very standard thing. But back then, like the lawyers didn't really have the language to communicate really what this was. We weren't the first company, but like I remember, a gentleman at Gunderson came to meet me and it's like, you need to. I think he said something like, you need to create a box that people, when they see that box, they love that box. And I was like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And then it made sense, right? Like we had more conversations, and eventually, and now you see like a bunch of people just doing the Cayman sandwich. And so like the ability to kind of like take some of the learnings and give them back is a lot of fun. And I have a lot of fun talking to entrepreneurs. I think it's one of the things that actually like, gives me a lot of energy, is just seeing people who are earlier on in their journey with that enthusiasm, that energy, that uncertainty, taking on that risk. it's a lot of fun.
That sounds like a great story, Daniel. And just to start closing the night, what would be your advice to all these entrepreneurs, especially Central American entrepreneurs that are here, hearing you? Like, some are struggling, some are doing a little bit better, some are, growing a lot. But what do you think is, apart from resilience, what you would tell them?
Yeah, so I'll tell a little story that maybe some people in the audience know, but one of my biggest passions out of Bitcoin and like building Bitso is I love flying. I love flying little planes, little rickety planes, not nothing fancy, not a jet. These are planes that are more like coffee makers with wings. You get on them and you're kind of like bouncing around. And when I took my flight training, I did it in the US. And when I took my flight training, my instructor told me, one of the things that I need you to understand is that in aviation, you need to have an attitude of knowing that you can make a difference. And so I want you to like look at yourself in the mirror for the next week and just look at yourself in the mirror and say, you can make a difference. I was like, this guy is a little weird. So a week went by, I had my next lesson, and he's like, hey, so did you do that? I was like, no, Steve, I didn't do it. He's like, man, it's very important. One day you're gonna thank me. So you need to go to the mirror and say, you can make a difference. So I went the next day, shower, looking at myself in the mirror, and I was looking at me straight in the eye, and I said, you can make a difference. And my roommate was walking by, and my roommate's like, what the fuck are you doing, man? I'm like, oh my God, so ashamed. He's like, I don't know, I have to do this. Anyways, I did the thing. I did the thing for a week, and maybe like a year and a half later, I was flying. We went I was living in San Francisco, but we rented a small plane in Palo Alto, and I flew 3 friends of mine, none of who were pilots. We flew to Redding, California, north of California, because there was an eclipse. We watched the eclipse, and then we were flying back. And on the way back, we're flying over Oakland, and my engine quit. Fully quit. And you go from this thing that's like kind of bouncing around to like, and it's just all silent, and it just the planes don't fall, they plane, but it was suddenly very quiet, and definitely like the vibrations were gone, and I kind of freaked out. I there's a minute that you're like, this can't be happening to me, and then the guy who was sitting on my right, who was not a pilot, but he loved to listen to like radio chat, like aviation radio chatter. He's like, man, you know that Oakland Tower is talking to you, because we're talking on the radio with Oakland Tower, and they were asking us to turn. He's like, you know that Oakland, you heard them, right? They're talking to you. And at this point, I realized like no one on the plane has realized that the engine is off, and that like we're basically falling. And that training kind of like kicked in. And I realized that if anyone was going to try and do something in that situation, it was going to be me. Nobody else knew anything about planes. No one had done training. And actually, like, even though it sounds weird, I remember that image of looking at myself in the mirror and saying, you can make a difference. And when something like this happens on a plane, there are these emergency checklists that you have. And lo and behold, I started to run through the checklist, and the engine came back up and started to run again. That's very weird. If there's any pilots, I had a little bit of icing on the carburetor, and there's a thing where you literally put heat on the carburetor, it melts the ice, and the engine came back on. And we flew and landed in Palo Alto, and nothing more was eventful. But I guess like the advice that I would give the entrepreneurs in the audience is the following. Look at where you are. Look at who is surrounding you. You're incredibly lucky. Like, you're amongst a set of people that is able to get invited to an event like this, connect with other individuals, connect with investors, learn from other people, listen to incredible panelists in the room. If anyone is going to make a difference in Central America, it's going to be you. And there's going to be moments where you're going to be thinking, thank you. Woo! But there's going to be moments where you're going to be thinking, you know, there's no way this can be happening. There's no way that this, like, that is the moment where you need to look at yourself in the mirror and you need to say to yourself, you know, if I don't do this, then who? And you should find the energy to keep pushing, and you should go out and build amazing things and take advantage of these connections, the capital that is growing in the region, the opportunity, and just go out and do something fucking amazing. And so good luck. Woo.
Daniel, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here in Costa Rica. Thank you for sharing your personal story, and for being you, and for being an inspiration to so many people. Thank you for, you know, being an angel investor, and we hope to have you here in 5 years again, telling the Bitso IPO story. And if you open any secondary rounds, let me know.
Sounds good. Just thank you so much for having, and I think thank you for putting this together. It's a wonderful summit, and you know, at the end of the day, this is how we all make a difference. You know, creating these spaces, exchanging ideas, and just changing the world. That's the only way I think that you have to change the world. And so, thank you for having me, and hopefully, no pressure, but hopefully, I can deliver on that vision. Thank you.
I'm sure you can. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.